I am yours, I am yours, I am yours. Send me, Lord, I am yours.
Welcome to the Gospel-Centered Pro-Life Podcast. In this episode, we're going to talk with Mark Blackwell from Justice Ministries about how abortion and sex trafficking go hand in hand and how we can help women in those situations. Stay tuned.
Lord, send me, Lord. I felt your passion, I've touched your heart.
Use me, Lord, use me, Lord.
Well, welcome to the Gospel-Centered Pro-Life Podcast. Appreciate you guys listening. As we promised a couple of weeks ago, we're going to do this episode and really focus on the issue of sex trafficking and abortion and how those issues collide. And we have a special guest here with us, Mark Blackwell with Justice Ministries. He's going to introduce himself in just a minute. But Vicky, this was something we just kind of, as we were talking about the domestic violence, when we did that episode a couple of weeks ago, this is another one of those issues that we really felt like people need to be informed about, how these issues, how domestic abuse, domestic violence, and abortion kind of collide.
Right.
And then how sex trafficking collides with the issue of abortion.
Right, because we've seen it out there where we have had strong suspicions that there has been sex-trafficked women being brought, and we never really know quite what to do. And we have done things like call the National Hotline, but without a whole lot of success. So we thought it was time to call in an expert and really find out what we can do, what to look for, and how we should respond as sidewalk counselors.
Yeah. So guys, those who are out in front of abortion centers and you're trying to reach out and bring help and hope to the women going in, you'll see some of these situations, maybe some of the stuff that Mark says to look out for, you'll recognize, I've seen that in the past and I just didn't know. And so this is just to help equip you guys and inform you guys. And so, Mark, just go ahead and introduce yourself, man. What's your title? What's the ministry all about? And then we'll get into some of the ins and outs.
Sure thing. Well, first off, just thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here, and it's great to have discussion with you all. And I feel this is a very similar fight. As a matter of fact, I often say that, us being a counter sex trafficking agency, that it's really just an extension of the pro-life movement. That's what we're about. And, we're oftentimes, fighting for these individuals that are at high risk of death themselves with what they're trapped in. And so I just appreciate all that you do so much. We've partnered with you personally and on many efforts. And just, again, happy to be here, and thanks for having me. So I'm Mark Blackwell. I'm the president and founder of Justice Ministries. And we've been around for a little over 10 years. For me, basically, the issue of sex trafficking came on my radar my last semester in college. I was at a conference in Atlanta, Georgia, many of you know, called the Passion Conference. And that's where I learned about the issue of sex trafficking worldwide and what was going on. And God just broke my heart for the issue. And I felt God was saying to serve this population of people. I didn't know what that would look like. I didn't know that would mean starting an agency or anything like that. But I just felt this call to serve this population. Yeah. And after doing kind of my homework and research of what was going on overseas, but also stateside, and I found that, wow, there's, young women and even, teenage girls being raped and sold for profit on the streets of Charlotte, as a man, as a Christian, even as a Charlottean, I couldn't sit on that information. And I felt this call to start in my own backyard. Yeah. So God just kind of prompted us in that. We were the first counter-trafficking agency in the Charlotte region, and one of the only few in the state at the time. 10 years ago, the term human trafficking was starting to get some momentum. People were labeling what was going on in this modern-day slavery and starting to get a sense of what was happening, but it was still very, very new, So there was a lot of kind of pioneering effort to be done here. But again, after seeing the need, God just called us to serve this group. And, our model is basically based off the story of the Good Samaritan. Yeah. There's no secret sauce to what we do. We're just meeting people in their time of need and their time of vulnerability. And as the church, trying to help meet those needs, which are very basic, it's safe shelter. Yeah. It's transportation.
Getting them out of the ditch and getting them to an end.
Absolutely. And obviously there's complexities, with this particular subject of sex trafficking, but at the end of the day, these are just people that need help, like all of us. So we try to provide whatever resources we can and essentially help them on their journey to independence. Yeah. And that's really the name of the game.
Yeah. So let me ask, I'm sure, guys, you who are listening, you've heard the term sex trafficking and maybe even lately, it seems like there's been an uptick in people's attention toward sex trafficking, and there's maybe different terms and things that are associated with that. But just define our term real quick. Sex trafficking? What does that mean? You talked about modern day slavery. Just cue people into what exactly we're talking about.
So on a bigger scale, there's human trafficking. I mean, that's how you would define this crime.
Yeah.
And that involves labor trafficking. That involves sex trafficking. That can involve things like organ harvesting.
Yeah.
Child soldiers. With the labor side, all kinds of forced labor, from agrarian to warehousing to live-in maids and housekeepers and that kind of thing.
Right.
And sometimes those intersect into sex trafficking as well. Just because someone's being labor trafficked, they may be exploited sexually as well.
Yeah.
So it's not a super clean thing to say, oh, that's definitely this case or definitely that case. But where we target most of our effort is in the topic of sex trafficking.
Yeah.
And again, based here in the U.S. With that said, we serve predominantly adult females.
Yeah.
But we have served minors and girls, also boys, some men, and those that identify with the LGBTQ community, just all the above. And we've also taken on some labor trafficking cases as well when they've come across our desk.
Yeah.
But our main focus is sexual exploitation and sex trafficking is where we kind of spend most of our time. The way you define sex trafficking in the U.S. by law, it's where there's basically a commercial sex act done by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the individual is under 18 years old.
Yeah.
So with that said, you hear about a 16-year-old prostitute. Legally not possible.
Right, yeah.
A child doesn't have the right to consent into this lifestyle.
Right.
So if they're under 18, it's automatic trafficking.
Yeah.
And if they're over 18, if they're an adult, then you have to prove force, fraud, or coercion happened that pushed them into this commercial sex industry, which can be what we see as traditional prostitution. It can be exotic dancing. It can be camming. It can be pornography. It can be even in like the sugar daddy, sugar baby context. I mean, there is a range. Most of what we're dealing with is what we would think of as forced prostitution.
Yeah, okay. And I've heard, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, but right now we're in Charlotte, North Carolina. Now people are listening from all over the United States, and people listen from all over the world to this podcast.
Sure.
But just talking about Charlotte, just the context here, what are the statistics? I've heard Charlotte's like number 4 in the nation for sex trafficking. Is that correct or is that incorrect?
The numbers are interesting. Where do we get our numbers and stats? Well, we get it from data. And data is a little bit all over the place with this topic of sex trafficking in the U.S. So I lean towards more conservative. But I'll put it this way. North Carolina, by the stats through the National Resource Center, is a top 10 state.
Yeah.
And Charlotte is the number 1 location in North Carolina.
Yeah.
So you could argue then that Charlotte is a top 10 city in the U.S. That you could make that argument.
Is there something about Charlotte in particular that would cause it to be, or can you identify what makes something a top city?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously the East Coast in general is more densely populated. And you have between Miami and New York, Charlotte's kind of a midway point.
Yeah.
We're also a midway point between Atlanta and D.C.
Yeah.
We have a major international airport, and we're not far from I-40. We're right here at I-85. We're right here at I-77. And you can get anywhere in the country from Charlotte pretty quickly.
Yeah.
We host a lot of major events. Within the past decade, we've hosted both the RNC and the DNC. We have all the major sports teams. We have NASCAR. We host all kind of large events. And anytime there's large populations of people being brought to a community, traffickers see that as potential business.
Yeah.
So it's not that there's something wrong with Charlotte in general, that like, oh, Charlotte just has this high risk. It's that like any large metropolitan area, we're hosting large events and we're easy to travel to and exit from. And when you have that sets up the ingredients to be a high-risk location for sex trafficking.
Okay. Charlotte is also one of the abortion capitals of the Southeast, particularly where we minister at Latrobe.
Sure.
Is there a link there between so many people coming really from all over the Southeast for abortions here in Charlotte and the incidence of sex trafficking?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think those two issues go hand in hand. Sex is something that its main function is to produce children.
Right.
I feel like in our culture, it's sad that I think we almost need to define that for people.
Yeah.
Like, people have sexual relations to procreate. Like that is the deal. But
Right.
it's become so perverted and twisted and brought into other categories. And the idea of having one partner for your life is just this foreign concept. Like we're so far away from like the biblical direction on how to raise a family and how to do this.
Right.
So yeah, absolutely. You know, if someone is in sex trafficking and they're being sexually exploited multiple times a day, even if they're on pills or using any kind of protection, still the chance of pregnancy is high. And if they're seen as a product that needs to produce, the trafficker doesn't want to take 9 months off, so he's going to most likely have her terminate that child. There's another version of this that we've seen that's even in kind of if you can have a further underbelly to sex trafficking, where that's not happening, sometimes the child is brought to term and used as either leverage for the victim or that child then sold into some type of human trafficking as well. So, I mean, it's a terrible, terrible situation. But certainly, the two do go hand in hand.
Yeah, so in a sense, abortion is helping the sex trafficker to cover his crimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
That is correct.
Yeah, I mean, we're dealing with a society, like you said, sex is just this recreational thing. And obviously, we know that God created sex as an enjoyable thing.
Sure.
Right?
Absolutely, yeah.
But then we take that, as you said, and pervert that and make that it's only about enjoyment, not about procreation. And you've got it's crazy. We're talking about an industry.
Yes.
I mean, from our perspective, it's crazy. We're talking about an industry, the abortion industry, that makes billions of dollars every year off of this thing called abortion. But I mean, you're dealing with an industry, the sex trafficking industry.
Multi-billion-dollar industry.
Yeah, that's one of the questions I want to get at. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
The level of money that is involved with this, I mean, even 10 years ago when we started, I remember one of the phrases people would use would say, if Nike, Google, Starbucks, and Walmart combined their profits, global sex trafficking is still bringing in more money than those companies combined. And so you're dealing with a mega crime industry.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, when you have big money, it greases a lot of wheels, even all the way through up government and the systems that should be stopping that and keeping that from happening. Well, if you have high places of power and limited morals and there's money floating around, that is a bad combination.
Yeah, it is a bad combination. You just open the floodgates for all kinds of evil. And
absolutely.
I know on social media and other realms, there's a lot of this talk about child trafficking, and it seems like it's on an uptick. Is that the case, that there is an uptick in sex trafficking, or just more people are talking about it? I don't know.
A couple
What's
things.
Your thoughts?
The awareness has increased.
Okay.
Child trafficking's been going on since well before we started, and well beyond that. I mean, it's been going on for a very, very long time. It is gaining traction, and child trafficking specifically is getting more attention. There's some restructuring going on at the federal law enforcement levels that I think is having a ripple effect that is being beneficial to free up more manpower to go after this subject. You know, in general, law enforcement agencies are taxed and spread thin, right?
Yeah.
There is some reprioritizing that's been going on that I think is going alongside with some of the increase that we're seeing. And, even with the Trump administration, just recently they passed $35 million to go into actual victim resources. There's been a lot of money raised in the name of human trafficking, but it would shock you how little of that actually ends up being direct services or bed space for survivors.
Yeah, I bet.
So the money that just came through, I mean, we didn't see any of it. There was only one agency in North Carolina and one in South Carolina that received that funding, which is great. I mean, that's excellent.
Sure.
And that will go fast, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I was still just encouraged to see that momentum that, hey, even at the federal level, some money is being loosened up to specifically target getting resources for individuals that have been caught up in human trafficking, because it should be a top priority. I mean, the fact that it's going on, we were talking before the podcast, slavery was abolished a long time ago in our country.
Right.
This is a form of modern day slavery,
Absolutely.
and we should be coming at it really hard and really swift.
Right.
But for too long, we've basically just been kind of dancing around the issue, and sometimes I feel that we're more concerned about the risk of acting versus the risk of not acting. And it really, that's been something that's bugged me for a long time. But it's a true pandemic. I mean, we have a serious problem going on right now.
Yeah.
And so we know it's there, we know it's happening, and we know that it's certainly these women are being brought to the abortion center. We know that, and in fact, we have seen what we have suspected sometimes. But maybe could you speak a little bit about what to look for? Because I know you probably would notice things that we might not.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell, at least with you guys, you're pretty sharp. So you'd probably pick up on most of it. But and if you want to check it out, the National Resource Center, also called Polaris Project, on their website they do have a list of recognizing the signs. If you will, probably some 50 things to look for.
Yeah, we'll put a link for that actually in the description of this podcast,
Sure.
so those who are listening can go to that website.
But some of the big ones would be. And again, most women that are being brought to an abortion clinic, I mean, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of emotion going on, so that could be confused to look like something that it's not necessarily.
Yeah.
So I would then zoom out a little bit and say, okay, anytime there's maybe a male bringing a female in, they don't look like they'd be in a typical relationship.
Yeah.
That should be somewhat of a red flag.
Like a much older man with a much younger person might be one example of that.
And even kind of in your own, assessment going, well, that looks a little off.
That's odd. Right.
And then certainly, as we discussed, if there was multiple women that one guy or one individual was bringing in. I mean, it could be a woman too. I mean, there are female traffickers. It could be a woman bringing 3 other women in, and that's just bizarre. I mean, that'd be a crazy scene. The individual, the victim, oftentimes doesn't really have control over their own documentation, over their own money. Sometimes they're a little fuzzy on where they're at and, where they're going. I know sometimes you have opportunity to kind of engage in a conversation level. Oftentimes you don't. But if there is that opportunity, you can pick up on that really quickly. Just the victim oftentimes won't have a lot of context that you'd have with a regular person you're meeting on the street.
Let me ask you, because it occurred to me as you were speaking, because in the incident I was telling you earlier on that we did see before we started the podcast, where we did see a man bring 4 victims. Well, what we thought were 4 victims.
Sure.
It was the middle of summer, and they were all wearing long sleeves, and we found that odd, and we were wondering, were they drugged? Were they using drugs? Is that a form of control in sex trafficking? And so would even something like that, long sleeves in the middle of a hot North Carolina summer.
Yeah, that's a good observation. Yeah, absolutely. Drug use is definitely common within sex trafficking. It's not every case. I've been actually shocked by how many cases that there wasn't drug use involved.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, depending on this type of trafficker, it can be utilized or not. And then sometimes it's something they use kind of towards the end, if you will, to keep someone compliant. But yeah, no, that the long sleeves could have been used to cover that. There also could have been significant tattoos or branding that had been easily identifiable, and then that could be used to cover that as well. But yeah, the big things to look out for with a potential victim is kind of their demeanor, how they're carrying themselves. Again, walking into an abortion clinic, it's tough because they're probably already feeling all kind of emotion. But that on the street, that's what we would look for is the way they're carrying themselves, if they won't make eye contact, if they won't speak on their own behalf and someone speaks for them, things of that nature, and then not having a lot of context on, where they're from or what they do or how they get here, how long they stay in, things that the rest of us could answer easily.
Sure. Right.
If you're being controlled by another person, you may not have quick answers or you're giving scripted answers.
Right.
Sometimes we're just watching them and we're not going to have an interaction, but are there things that we could be watching coming from the trafficker? That his interaction, I'm assuming it's a him. I know sometimes it might be a woman, but I'll say him just to make it easy. So his interactions with the women, are there things that are kind of tip-offs?
Yeah, I mean, just that presence of control. Is the big one. I mean, traffickers will confuse you. They will. I mean, they're manipulators. So I mean, in one sense, they may try to be loving on them and all caring, and another minute really really harsh.
Yeah.
It's all over the place. But in general, you're looking for an overall theme of this person seems to be controlling this other person, and there seems to be a real submissive situation or a fear of that person.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't ask this question to kind of get into like a cultural profiling or anything like that, but is it the case that many of the women that are being trafficked are from out of the country? So they might not exactly speak English. They might have an accent. Is that another thing that can kind of be a common denominator there that we could pick up on? Let's say we see some of those signs that you're talking about.
Yeah.
included with the fact that this person doesn't even speak the language.
Absolutely. No, if someone didn't speak English, that, and they're, again, still it appears that they're being controlled. This isn't a person that's caring for them and translating and being kind. They're being harsh. That would be a big red flag. For our experience, it's actually really surprised me. The high majority of our clients have actually been U.S. citizens. It has blown my mind. When we got into this, I assumed it'd probably be 50-50, 50% U.S. citizen, 50% foreign national. The high majority has actually been U.S. citizens.
Wow.
And a lot of the trafficking has been, there's different kinds of pimp. There's kind of the Romeo pimp, which is a small-time operator basically acting like he's in a relationship. It looks similar to domestic violence, but commercialized. And there's the gorilla pimp, which is heavily violent and things like that. And then there's kind of the CEO pimp, which may be the one that, is kind of presenting a fake business, and that's how he goes after people, and he has them convinced they're on track for some kind of career, And so there's a variety of more styles of it. But what we see very often is kind of what we call the Romeo pimp. And that's where, at least initially, the young lady felt like she was in a relationship with this person.
Yeah.
And she's having to go through some crazy things, but she's in her mind justified that the end result is going to be they're eventually going to be together. And this is just part of them getting the money they need to move on with life and things like that. I've heard that story time and time again, where it was more comparable to what the young lady saw as like a relationship until one day she just kind of saw that enough is enough, or the abuse got so bad she had true concern for her life that I may not survive the week. And then another big indicator why people call the hotline is they got pregnant, and they maybe will endure this for themselves because after all the trauma and abuse, they get kind of paralyzed. They don't know what to do.
Yeah.
But then once they find out they're pregnant, that innate maternal instinct is enough to say, I can't have this for my child. I got to get out of here. And so we've gotten many calls when it's not just, hey, come get me. It's, hey, come get me. Also, I'm pregnant and I need help quick.
Right.
That's very common.
Oh, I have so many questions for you. I know of, and I can't give the specifics on this, but I do know of definitely a sex trafficking whole thing going on.
Sure.
But the woman is terrified for her life. She, in the end, decided not to pursue it. At first, she was going to pursue it, then decided not to. So I know things that are just so revolting and so awful, and I am not allowed for fear of harming her. What do we do, and how do we report what we see, especially if they're, and maybe you could address that also, if the victim is not willing to report
That's a tough one. I mean, that is one of our biggest struggles. Again, to be really clear, we're a victim advocate organization. We're not an investigative agency. We partner with law enforcement, but we leave their job to be their job, and our job is our job. We collaborate with them wherever possible. But one of the biggest issues law enforcement runs into, and I think one that we run into as well, is when the victim wants help but isn't ready for help.
Right.
And that's a thin line, right?
Yeah.
You have some people that we could say you need help, but they don't think they need it, and they're very tough to assist because they think it's fine, or they haven't hit rock bottom for them yet, or whatever it is. But the person that legitimately wants help, they legitimately want out, but the fear of the unknown is somehow more terrifying than the trauma that they're living in right now.
Yeah.
Or the fear that they're going to be killed.
Exactly. Yeah. The fear of that, or the fear that if I try to run, then my perpetrator will come after me, and then he really will kill me. Right now, he's just beating me. But if I try to escape and I'm unsuccessful, then the fear of, potentially being killed, is a big one.
Yeah.
And then there's other manipulation tactics, like, well, if you run away, I'll go after your loved ones, things like that. That's pretty common. But yes, for us, that is a big challenge. And really what we need is when the victim is ready for help, whether through a law enforcement referral or they call us directly, or another NGO like yourselves is connected and they said, you're calling on behalf and you're in communication. You're saying, I want help. I'm ready to get out. Well, we kind of need that invitation so we can provide services and help them get out. If the person's not ready, then we can't force them into it. Yeah. And you're probably running into the same thing. And I think the main thing to do there is just have that consistent outreach and just let them know help is here when you're ready. And then if there are opportunities for conversation, which there rarely is, I mean, it's not like we can go get in a coffee shop and talk about your exit plan. All this is being done in the margin. I mean, this is being done in thin spaces of like, hey, I had this moment to connect, or I had this moment to send you this message or communicate this through a third party, helping get word that like help is available. But then if there's a lot of nerves, that can be a tough thing to navigate. So I think the main thing we can do is obviously just be available, be consistent, and pray for them that they would attempt to exit.
Yeah.
On the second note, I would highly encourage people, as with law enforcement, when you see an active crime going on, or you say, hey, this looks like trafficking, I definitely think this is, and it's happening in real time, and there's actionable things that can be done, 100%, call law enforcement right then and there and say, hey, I have reason to believe this is happening.
Right.
The big challenge is it's so rare that you run into a live, real situation where you could report it and it could be acted on in that window, because police need that burden of proof.
Yeah.
And then the other challenge we'll run into, even if all that happens, is, again, if the victim isn't ready for help, they're going to be more scared of their perpetrator than they are the law enforcement, and they may feed law enforcement a bunch of lines. And then basically they'd have to be, well, you're free to go, I guess.
Yeah,
Right.
kind of throws everything out of whack.
It is highly complicated
Right.
in trying to engage.
Well, in this specific situation, I guess they could say it was hearsay. It was what she told me.
Right.
But it was so horrific, and she would not report it. And I wondered, was there any way I could anonymously report it, and how, while protecting her? And I didn't know what to do, so I did nothing.
Well, and in those situations, if there was a way to if you had another engagement with her, like when we do outreach, we hand out our local hotline number, because what we're hoping for is, even if they're not ready right now, then when they're ready, or they feel that there's a safe window, then they can call us. And in that sense, we can then serve them and get them out, because many of them in this lifestyle have been forced to do illegal activity, or there's a fear of police or whatever it is. So we can be an alternative, because we're not kicking in doors or anything like that. We're literally kind of a specialized taxi service for people wanting to exit this, and we can do that as a victim advocate agency. So they can just exit. And many victims I've worked with, it has shocked me when kind of you step back and zoom out and you're going, wow, you didn't leave because you didn't have the simple resources to get away. So if you'd had even a few $100s to hire transport and immediate lodging, you maybe could have even done this yourself, but you didn't even have that. You barely had clothes on your back. So that level of lack of resources can keep someone very trapped.
Yeah.
So for us, getting the hotline out to the right people is critical.
Okay.
And then having our opportunity to respond to a situation we've been invited to. And then, for other live action situations that are happening in a public setting, 100% get the police in there. And it's always appropriate to take information nonetheless and still call them the non-emergency number or whoever, and just passing that on to law enforcement, because we never can assume what active investigations they have going on. And that information from the community may be just enough to take things to the next level. So it's if police are saying, hey, I'm good, I mean, they're going to communicate that to you if they feel like, hey, this really isn't helpful. But I mean, otherwise, I basically try to pass on information when I have it and let them decide if it's useful or not.
Yeah.
So practically in front of an abortion center, where we're going to see presumably the trafficker and then the victims, and if we strongly suspect it, and we did call the police, I know in our podcast on domestic violence that can really endanger the woman because she's going to be punished. So can you talk about that at all? Is that ever an issue, that the trafficker will then beat the woman afterwards or whatever because...
Yeah, so I guess what you're saying is some kind of like the rules of engagement stuff. Like, what are some do's and don'ts?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
If we see this,
right?
You're saying, of course, call law enforcement, and then, of course, if you're able to get the hotline into their hands, get that into their hands. But as far as our interactions with that woman, what are some of the things that we shouldn't do?
I got you. Yeah, no, that's a really delicate one. And to some degree, most places I speak, I'd probably say, I would encourage people not to engage. For y'all, you're not your average street outreach individuals, volunteers. So I wouldn't try to define what to do or not to do. I'd really leave that up to to individuals and to how the Holy Spirit's moving them. I'm not going to say do's or don'ts because, hey, there's no exact playbook for some of this stuff. But I am glad to hear that you are cognizant of some outreach can put victims at risk. And that's why when we do ours, we try to be very clandestine about it because what you don't want to do, matter of fact, good example. We used to do street outreach. We used to literally go out to where girls were walking, the track and engage them on the street and just, hand them a card, hey, if you want help. But we saw that there's actually some risk there of the trafficker who's 200 yards away in an SUV then saying, what was that about? What'd you tell them? Unnecessarily bothering her. And then even at times we were like, okay, well, we could discreetly hand it to her while driving by, but we just got to a point where it wasn't very effective. We almost never had anyone leave right then. And we had other effective measures that seemed to be a lot more productive. I won't go into what those are, but that seemed to have been working better. So we kind of backed off from street outreach specifically because it was the bigger risk with less response. So same type thing. I would, whatever that looks like, for you guys or for other groups that are maybe listening, keep that in mind. The way in which you engage, assume you're being watched, and try to not do things that could put more pressure on her. And it could be as simple as coming up with an excuse for your engagement other than providing services so that she has something to report back. Oh, they were just asking me if I wanted to do adoption or whatever it is. Okay. And just only talk about that, Right. But it is a challenge because there has to be some level, of engagement. We can't just say, well, I hope they Google us one day.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Which fortunately they might, I know y'all have seen that. Search engine optimization is a positive thing in this modern context.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that people, if they have that moment to do a quick look online, we want to be up high where they could find us. But it is a balance and rules of engagement. In many ways, the good news is we're in America where we're free to talk to people, and we don't have to walk around fearful of it. So I would really think in context that we just have to be careful that we're not putting someone in a bad position.
Right, right. Because even offering the resources, he's going to perceive as a threat to his control over that woman because he needs her to go have that abortion and not talk to people about housing or whatever.
Oh, yes. So, and I'm sure you've experienced it. I'm sure you've had it where you were doing street outreach and the man bringing the lady in tried to intimidate you all. I'm sure you've had dozens of those cases. Oh, I'm tough. And the reality is it probably doesn't work that well because you're like, I'm not here for you, buddy. I'm praying for you, but I'm concerned about that baby in her belly right now.
Yeah. But let's say best case scenario, we somehow get that woman alone. She does somehow, he's gone away or whatever, and we're able to talk with her. What are the resources that you offer?
Sure. So we do our best to offer immediate shelter.
Okay.
So we have a setup where we try to have a response time that is literally within hours of the call. Oh,
really? Okay.
It's not always possible because, again, we're covering North and South Carolina.
Okay.
And we're a small grassroots team. And anyone out there listening that wants to help, we need your money really bad. We need the financial support. Yeah, absolutely. Because we're very much like a volunteer firefighter department that's covering a 2-state territory.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm getting calls that are sometimes spreading you really thin.
Yeah.
And you have existing clients that also need your help.
Right.
So with all that said, when we get a hotline call, our goal would be to be able to get to that survivor within 3-hour window, and then get them set up with some immediate shelter and immediate resources to really have that clean break.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, when you're dealing with safe houses, you have to almost think like a virologist, and not cross-contaminating.
Sure.
You have to kind of have a clean break from your active situation, get you in a safe housing situation that's separate and on its own, to assess and be that emergency time period until you can find the long-term housing that we then transition them to. Okay. Because we don't just pick people up and all take them to the same house because that would be crazy.
Right.
And if it's a setup or it's fake, you just exposed a secure location.
Yeah.
So it's multifaceted in how we do the immediate housing, but that's something we try to do at a quick response. Honestly, during COVID, that's been a little more complicated because of the health issues there, and then even some of our housing has been limited because they're like, oh, is this a quarantine situation or whatever? It's like, no, it's not. So it's complex, but in general, on a regular, all systems go, we try to respond within hours of the call and get them immediate separation from the situation and immediate safety and basic resources.
Yeah.
And do you kind of take over from there then also in terms of, okay, they've been in the sex trade now for a while, they need work, a new job and whatever. So do you hand them off to another agency or how does it work?
So I'll define it this
ongoing
way.
needs?
So basically you have 4 areas. You have outreach, which is just engaging the at-risk population, and which I'll be a part of in this. Then you have emergency housing, emergent care, and that can be the first 3 days to the first 3 months. I mean, we'll have someone set up for sometimes 3 months before we transition them if there's limited availability. There's still only 1,000+ bed space across the country for designated for sex trafficking.
Yeah.
It's a drop in the bucket. So we always have to get creative and outside of the specified sex trafficking bed space. Right. That's a common thing. So that's the emergent care. And then what I call program care is when you send them to a women's home or a housing program that could be up to 12 months is the idea. And they're getting more comprehensive care and going through some counseling and healing. And then you kind of graduate that and then transition to independent living. And then that's what I call transitional care. So you have outreach, emergent care, program care, transitional care. And when we do a little bit of all of it, we have one home for program care that stays fairly occupied.
Yeah.
Right now it's about 3/4 full, but we work with groups all across the country that do have those kind of houses.
Yeah.
From West Coast to Texas, to the Carolinas, all over.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, so many of them do stay full. The ones that are run well, they stay full. I mean, as y'all know, there's a lot of need.
Yeah.
So there is room to expand in that topic especially. So where we have focused a lot of our energy is on the emergent side. We found you got to get them out first. If nothing else, helping them get away and get safe and put them on a direction is better than nothing. So we put a lot of energy there. We use our safe house, and then we work with others across the country for long-term care. And then we also put a great deal of energy on transitional, because what so often would happen is someone completes a program, they've been out for a year, it's been going great, but they've also been living in this kind of not real life situation because they're having all this support and no rent and don't have a grocery bill or anything like that.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're supposed to be better now and just go make it. And so many can fall right back into this or something similar.
Right.
And we don't want that to happen. So we put a lot of our effort on transitional care, and that's helping with rent assistance, or your car broke down and we're going to help you get it back on the road because you got to keep the car so you can keep your job and get your kids to child care and all those things. We do what we can to assist with work placement, or at least completing education through a GED or community college. And then we also assist with child care expenses as well, where we can, and what we have budgeted. I mean, again, we're a small budget, but we try to make those things a priority, because the individual who's a year and a half out and just trying to get on their feet is just as important, and we don't want them to fall right back into it and be someone who's going to call again because we didn't see it through. So we do our best to do that, but that's another area where we can invite the local church into it more. I mean, we just see ourselves as an arm of the church, and a lot of our team are pastors' wives and things like that. But at that level of volunteerism is a unique opportunity for just the everyday volunteer who says, hey, I want to help somehow. Well, great. Maybe you could be kind of a mentor for this individual who just has some like life navigating questions, not so much help me work out my trauma questions, which you don't need as much training for that. So that's where we put our energies, on the emergent and on the transitional. But even, I mean, right now the program house we have, I mean, it's costing us about $8,000 a month to run that.
Wow.
So if anyone wants to help us and get started, we actually had a donor that was supporting that won't be able to continue with that. So we're now fundraising for that specifically and trying to get a recurring $8,000 a month to keep the safe house fully funded and its own thing, and keep that running smooth.
Yeah.
Are those women that are just in the Charlotte area, or are you drawing women from all over the country to that safe housing?
Correct.
Okay.
All over the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting in that sense. And so many of the clients we do serve in the Charlotte area end up going out of state. We've had many that want to get away, which makes sense, and it's not a bad plan. And once that does happen, to answer your earlier question, there is kind of a passing of the baton at that point. We've done our piece, and once we place them with a group in Arizona, for now our job's done, unless they need to call us back.
Right. Yeah. So. How often do they just return to the same lifestyle, or what's the success rate, I guess, of the once you get them out of the situation, do most of them make it?
I don't have the active numbers. In the earlier years, I was able to track it a little more, and I felt like it was 35, 40% would fall back into it in some
They would
context.
fall back into it, okay.
Or fall back into some kind of exploitive context.
Yeah.
But one positive is we'd have many of them call us again.
Yeah.
And then there was an opportunity to serve that individual a second time. And we're the doors are open.
Yeah.
If you want help, and it's not obviously you adapt it each time because
Sure.
we don't want to enable or anything. But yeah, certainly you made a mistake. Don't we all? That's what it's supposed to look like. We're supposed to be there for them. So earlier on, that's the numbers I was seeing. Right now, I honestly don't have clear numbers because so many of the victims in recent years we've served, we have helped them to the next phase, and then our job was done. And if they change phone numbers 6 months later, I have no way of engaging them, and so I really don't know.
Yeah.
And then that's okay. It's not. I mean, we're the stance of call us if you need us kind of thing.
Absolutely.
But just because I haven't heard from somebody doesn't mean I assume they've fallen back into it.
Yeah.
So I don't know that it's. I'm really hoping it's not that high as it seemed in the earlier years.
Yeah.
So. And the other benefit we're dealing with is there are more houses than there used to be. Back when I started, I think there was only 600 beds nationwide
Wow.
for trafficking. No, I take that back. In 2010, there was only 100 beds nationwide designated for sex trafficking survivors.
Wow.
And around 2014, which is when I was reflecting on is it 40%? I think there was around 600, and now probably closer to 1,000. Or more, you lose track because agencies come up and go under every day. But we're in a much better position, than we were 10 years ago as a country when it comes to resources.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are we looking at as far as statistically nationally? How many of these? I mean, I know it's hard to gauge.
Sure.
Just sort of these shot in the dark estimates. But what are the estimates of how many women are trafficked every year?
Yeah.
And all of that.
Yeah, hundreds of thousands. I can say that. I wouldn't try to speculate on numbers. And internationally, it's we're talking 30 to 40 million kind of type thing of people caught in human trafficking. In terms of stateside, even back in 2010 when I was starting, the State Department said that there was risk of 100 to 300,000 children being trafficked in the U.S. every year.
Wow.
So that was 10 years ago, and they had 100 to 300,000 estimate annually. Yeah. So I was like, wow, that's crazy, and that's just kids. So we can assume it's actually probably higher than that, and we can assume as it relates to adults and every demographic, you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of people. The other thing we have going on, to your point earlier, though most of our clients are U.S. citizens, we do have some that are foreign national, and I've done some work down at the border doing trafficking assessments. I briefly was contracting with Samaritan's Purse last summer just to assist with some trafficking assessments down there, and man, we have a huge risk of people that are even coming through and have their court date and things like that have been tagged. There's still such a potential risk of them being exploited just due to basic vulnerabilities of not knowing the language. I can't work right now. I'm kind of dependent on my sponsor. Yeah. Even those that are seeking asylum and were granted temporary asylum, like even those are at risk, much less those that have gotten in and are not documented at all. I mean, so certainly they're not calling the police or anything if someone finds them and decides to exploit them. So you have a lot of potential risk of foreign nationals being trafficked through either the cartels, just doing it through an organized crime sense, or even those that have made their way here, whether they're, having asylum or not, they're still potentially at risk for being manipulated. Yeah. And that is just a administrative item that would be so tough to try to analyze and get a handle on, like how big is that possibly. So I think a lot of that's even further underground. But it again, I think again my main message is it's way bigger than people think. And I think sometimes it surprises me occasionally on social media or whatnot, is like when you'll hear about a case and people are like, whoa, I can't believe this. And I'm like, yeah, that's terrible. But guys, it's way bigger than that, and just
it's like happening every day, not just one situation.
Kids
here
are going missing daily, and you're just dealing with massive numbers of people that otherwise you wouldn't really be aware of it.
Yeah,
so,
I know some folks, at least that I see on social media, it's almost like this is a conspiracy theory. Like, it's really not happening. People are saying it's happening, but the real numbers are there. You can really find out this is not just some conspiracy that's happening. It's a conspiracy for sure, but it's not just a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
It's happening, and people are being exploited. Children are being exploited. And from what you're saying, abortion, as far as the way these issues tie together, is used as a cover-up, a manipulation device, and other things that we really need to be on the lookout for as those who are ministering in front of an abortion center.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think for the listeners, I would throw something out that may help provide some context. I think very often it's easy to say we have to have a mindset shift. And well, what does sex trafficking look like? Because it's easy to even drive down to Sugar Creek or wherever and say, oh, that's just somebody prostituting. Maybe, and it might be. However, there's a lot of things that could look like prostitution or look like you're working for yourself where you're actually not.
Yeah.
A lot of the individuals we've served and a lot of the young ladies we've assisted, if you just met them on the street or at a 7-Eleven or whatever, you maybe wouldn't have thought much of it.
Yeah.
And even if to your point, if you'd asked them directly, they may say, no, I'm fine, get out of my face, and cuss you out a little bit. So it's we have this image of like some 12-year-old Asian, girl in a cage somewhere, and that's human trafficking, and it is. And that is very real and very massive concern, and that's part of it. But it also can kind of be right under your nose.
Yeah.
And we could even see it and write it off as, man, why won't they get their act together?
Right.
And we don't know that there actually is a pimp that is controlling them. And unfortunately, she actually sees him as kind of a boyfriend, so it's really messy.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, he's having her sleep with multiple people a night, and he's keeping the money.
Right.
So that is sex trafficking.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes the reason we are shocked by the numbers is we aren't including that there's a lot of those cases that may not look like what in our mind it would look like, but it actually is playing out.
Yeah.
Are there maybe some questions that we could ask if we do happen to get them alone that would reveal to us what's going on? Maybe if they're hesitant at first to reveal it really obviously?
For me, what has been beneficial, because here's the thing: in our modern 2020 context, a stranger walking up and wanting to help is going to freak a lot of people out.
Yeah.
They're going to say, "What is your angle?"
Yeah.
And fair enough. I mean, I've had so many of our clients tell me, in one time or another, "Wow, you're the first man I've dealt with in years that didn't want anything from me."
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like even to the point where a new client sometimes will say, say we get them set up with some stuff and bring them groceries and whatever, they'll say, I'll find a way to pay you back. And I go, let me clarify, like there's no payback here.
Right,
You thank us by getting better and get the help that we're trying to offer. And, But like even the idea that we legitimately want to help and there's no strings attached. On the flip side, I've often thought, how bad does your situation have to be when you're willing to get into a van with strangers at 3 a.m. off the side of the road?
Yeah.
You got to say, anything's better than what I'm dealing with. You know, I mean, it's a gutsy move on their part. But so, to your point, I think we have to go in with the understanding that they're not going to assume there's no strings attached. They're also going to assume you can't handle what I'm going through. And sometimes there's even a testing period of like, I'm going to cuss you out. I'm going to be difficult because I'm going to see if you're for real. If you really just love me for me, or if, you're trying to meet a quota or, whatever it is. And that's kind of the thing. It just saying, hey, we're just here to help. No strings attached. Test us on that. I mean, it's like, give it a shot if you don't want it.
Absolutely.
And I've even had to clarify that with those that we have helped in an emergency context, remove and get them placed and get them set up. I say, hey, I want to be really clear, like, especially if they're over 18. I say, you're not a prisoner here. If at some point you just want to go, like, you can. I said, the only thing I'll ask is you can't tell anybody where this location is and you can't invite people over here. Right. But you are not trapped. Now, if you feel like you're about to go, please call us first and let us help you on that journey. But you are not stuck. And everything we're offering is free. And I know that sounds crazy because nothing's free, right? But it is, and we just truly want to help you. So like really almost helping them see that they're not stuck, that they have some power here. And that's the crazy shift. Can you imagine going from a situation for, say, the past 3 years, you couldn't even decide what you ate or when you ate or when you slept.
Right.
And then now these random church people, are saying, hey, what do you have a taste for? What can we pick you up? Do you know what size jeans you are? It's like, what are you talking about? It can be a very foreign, like, whoa. What are you going to make me do? What are you signing me up for? Nothing. We're just here to help. And And again, wow, what a great context when they say, well, why are you doing this?
Right. Well, that gives you the opportunity. I was
Boom.
just going to ask, do you share the gospel?
Yes,
Is that a part of
you
your
get
ministry?
you get to then say, I'm so glad you asked.
Right, exactly.
There's this guy, Jesus. He's
Yeah.
the Son of God, the Savior of the world, and
Right.
he loves you, and he's the one
Right.
that said, come and get you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you don't like what we're offering, take it up with him. It's like,
Yeah.
but Jesus loves you, and we love you, and this is a way we can show our love towards Jesus by caring for you.
Yeah, and are you seeing people come into the Lord through
We
the...
do, and you know what else has also fascinated me? How many have actually they do. It may be kind of hidden under the debris, but like so many of them even have some relationship with Christ that is there.
Right.
Yeah.
And then there's that opportunity to really just help them come back to intimacy with the Lord.
Yeah.
You know, it's not, sometimes it's who's Jesus? But a lot of times it's I know he's out there. And it's just then our opportunity as brothers and sisters to then kind of just lead them back to him. And then it really makes sense. And then I think the other important thing for groups like us to do is to see everything we're providing. Again, it's not me. The difference between the Good Samaritan and us is Good Samaritan paid for it off his dime.
Right.
Like, it isn't my money. This is coming from the church and from donors, and this is ultimately all the Lord's. I mean, we all know it's all the Lord's, and we're just trying to take resources and put it into those that have need.
Yeah.
But no, that is the funniest thing. In fact, when I've had secular groups try to have us in a gotcha moment, so you're just trying to proselytize, you're trying to do this, I'm going, well, actually, we're just registered as a charity. But I say the reality is, would that be so bad? But secondly, even still, 99% of the time, it's the survivors that bring up anything about spirituality or why we're here, even before we need to. Because it does come to mind. Why are you here? What is prompting this action? Well, Jesus Christ. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
Mark,
good stuff.
we're going to wrap this thing up in just a minute, man, but I really appreciate you coming on and
Sure
just
thing.
talking about all this. But before we wrap this up, is there a story or something you could share just in a situation you've been involved in or Justice Ministries has been involved in that would encourage folks?
Sure, yeah. Man, there's so many. So yeah, I have one in mind, and she's got some children and is doing well now. But she just recently reached out, and she's been out a long time. You know, she's doing fine. But she was just saying, hey, is there anything I can do to help what's going on and to help support the ministry?
Oh, that's awesome.
And she'd even offered to like do some paintings and things like that to see if there's something you could auction off or whatever. Which I said, hey, if you want to do that, that's amazing. That's super kind.
Yeah.
But just seeing that healing that does take place, that and the support that is able to be provided, that's able to help her not be in a place of necessarily survival mode years out.
Yeah.
But like because of that continued transitional care, she's at a place where her mindset's going to, how can I help the next generation? How can I be there
Beautiful.
for the other
Yeah.
girls? And she's going, I'm kind of stay-at-home mom. I don't have a lot I can do right now, but like, can I draw pictures? Can I do a craft? Can I do anything that would be useful? And that's really an encouragement to me to see that it's not this idea of, well, I'm a victim, and that's what I am. Victim status is temporary.
Yeah.
Like, and for anyone listening that's been through that kind of stuff, there's nothing innately wrong about being victimized. It had nothing to do with you. I mean, even if you made some poor decisions that led to that, still not your fault. We all make poor decisions every single day. Like, it happened to you. And there's nothing wrong with the individuals caught up in this. There's something wrong with what happened to them.
Yeah.
Even still, if you have been victimized, if you are going through that situation, it is okay to receive help. We all need it. Everyone needs help from time to time. And but that does not define you. That's not where your identity is. And moving forward, if there's any responsibility, it is to say, okay, now that I've gotten the help I need, I'm healthy again, or healthy for the first time. Okay, great. And certainly if you're a believer, okay, now go out and serve your neighbor.
Yeah.
If I have any action item for them, kind of like I told the other girls, no need to pay back, but hey, if you want to help, then help the next person. And that's really the whole point, because at the end of the day, it's not about being a sex trafficking victim or this or this or this. It's all just image bearers of God. We're just people. We're brothers and sisters that are all messed up, but we've got a perfect Father, and we've got the perfect Savior in Jesus, and we can now move forward with life with a light burden because he carries us through it.
Yeah.
And so that's my message. The enemy and the world wants us to stay in some kind of label of like, you're this, that you are your past. It ain't about yesterday. It's about where you're at today and where the Lord's leading you tomorrow.
Yeah. Amen. So if people wanted to get in touch with you, what's the website and maybe an email address to reach out to you?
Sure, yeah. The websites, if you just Google us, Justice Ministries, or you go to www.justiceministries.org.
Okay.
We're also on Facebook and Instagram, and we also have a smartphone app.
Okay.
So if in your app store, if you just search Justice Ministries, our logo is a bison, American buffalo.
Yeah.
A lot of people ask us, what is that about? And we picked that just because it was a cool looking mascot. But with bison, when predators would approach a herd of bison, they would kind of form a natural, kind of a protective perimeter around the smaller bison, or if one was sick and things like that, to kind of protect them from the wolves or whatever going after them. And that's kind of our posture. We're here more on a defensive posture, not so much offensive. The other thing that's kind of interesting is bison in America used to flourish and run all over the plains and whatnot, and they almost went extinct, because they were kind of, if you will, oppressed so heavily. But no one looks at a bison and says, wow, what a weak animal.
Right.
So that's, again, kind of my message to our survivors. It's like, no one looks at that bison and says, oh, wow, I mean, that's a strong animal. And what they went through 100 years ago, it had nothing to do with them. It was just the greed of other people.
Yeah.
But yeah, so anyways, when you look on look us up, you'll see that little logo of the American bison.
So justiceministries.org, and they can reach out to you through that. Your email address is likely there.
Sure.
And a phone number to reach out to. And then if you guys who are listening, if you want to donate and support their ministry, like any nonprofit, they need your support. Maybe your church has really got a burden for the issue of sex trafficking. Certainly, I'm sure you guys would love churches supporting you. I'm sure you probably already have some of that.
That's sometimes our primary support.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're happy to speak at churches or small groups, and happy to set up a Zoom meeting or call with anybody that wants to learn more. I mean, I get it. I welcome the questions, and we want to be as straightforward as we can and tell you what we can that doesn't jeopardize any security. But it's a weird thing to market.
Yeah.
This counter sex trafficking is a tough thing to advertise. But yeah, we certainly appreciate you guys having us and helping us. Thank you for what you're doing and the collaboration it's just all an effort, just take a stance for life and serve the oppressed. And again, I love what y'all are doing, and we're happy to partner with you wherever we can.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, I appreciate that, brother. Appreciate your time.
God bless you.
And you guys who are listening, we appreciate you listening. We just ask you to share this podcast, share it with friends and family, put it out on social media. Reach out to me, dparks@citiesforlife.com, and her, vcassiorg@citiesforlife.com. If you have any questions and maybe other subjects you want us to cover, we'd certainly love to cover those subjects. But until next time, God bless.
Give me an outlet for love. Give me an outlet for gratitude. I know it will cost me my life, but nothing's too precious since I met you.